Okay, so I'd like to welcome each of you to the webinar on functional recovery. This will be presented by the Associate Medical Director of the Department of Labor and Industries, Bob Moots. Welcome, Bob.
Thank you. All right, well, most of you already know a little bit about the functional recovery questionnaire and functional recovery interventions, but I'll go through some of the basic high-level information about it, and then get into some of the details about it as we go through this. And just as kind of housekeeping here, I think if you're on a desktop and can ping Brian with a question through the GoToMeeting stuff, that'll let us know that there's a question going on, and then we can unmute you or discuss it if we need to clarify it. If you can write the question down, we can probably just answer it that way, and then I'll certainly make time at the end to address any questions anyone has. So I'll get started here. So functional recovery is all about identifying which workers are at risk and of high likelihood of becoming disabled from their work comp injury. And the COHEs have really become kind of our front line for best practices for workers overall. And the health services coordinators are really the kind of the work comp rock stars. You guys help the attending providers provide the best care. I think I don't know if I've got the quote exactly right, but it's getting the right stuff to the right people at the right place at the right time, something like that. And you're really keeping the attending provider, the employer, the worker, and L&I all on the same page to get that worker as back to normal as you can and back to work. And so really this whole process of FRQ especially is providing a safety net for workers who have problems so they don't fall through the cracks. So as you know, a very small percentage of work comp injuries become chronically disabled from their work injury. They're permanently disabled, they lose their career, their benefits, their retirement, frequently their family lives fall apart. But of this small percentage of workers who fall through the cracks, almost all of the cases begin as simple, plain vanilla, non-catastrophic musculoskeletal injuries, a back strain, a shoulder injury, carpal tunnel syndrome. And in the beginning, they pretty much look the same as everybody else. And so our big challenge is, what if we could identify who they are before they actually get to the disability stage? So I like this little metaphor of asking, rhetorically, what would you want your doctor to do if you started to have chest pain and shortness of breath, nausea, a little left arm pain, and your parents had died of cardiovascular disease at an early age? Would you want to wait a month to see if it goes away, or maybe 2 weeks of arm and shoulder work by a PT to see if that helps, or maybe prescribe some morphine for the pain, or certify a few weeks off work? Obviously, that's the worst possible thing you could do for a heart attack, but it's also the worst possible thing you could do for an injured worker who's at high risk of this long-term disability. So research that's been done at the University of Washington has identified 3 questions for injured workers who are not able to return to work in the previous week due to their work injury. And if this is administered within 2 to 4 weeks after their injury takes place, it looks like we can identify who's at risk of becoming long-term disabled. And perhaps even more importantly, we've identified some questions that will help us identify why they may be in that situation. And the questions fall into, there's 6 questions, and the first 3 are the ones that dial in that they're in the risk category. And that's that they haven't worked for pay for the past week due to their injury. They have pain interference greater than a 5 on a 10-point scale called a visual analog scale, the 0 to 10 scale. And they have back and leg pain that goes below the knee, or they have pain in multiple body areas. So if all 3 of these questions are answered that way, that makes them a FRQ positive patient or a high disability risk patient. The other 3 questions that you administer with the FRQ are kind of figure out why questions. Why might they be in this category? These were some additional things that were done in the disability research that identified the FRQ originally that strongly correlated with the first three questions, and they are that the worker is not aware that the employer has made them an offer of accommodation. Now, this could be because the worker doesn't know, because there's poor communication, or because the employer didn't make an offer. So it's if the worker doesn't think they've got the ability to go back at light duty, that isn't a figure out why factor. Also, if the worker is afraid that if they go back and do their job or the tasks that caused them to get injured in the first place, that it will make their condition worse. When you have low back pain and radiculopathy, which can be extraordinarily painful, it may be so painful, some workers may think, oh my gosh, I could get paralyzed from this. So that kind of catastrophic thinking or fear that if they move or do anything, it's going to make it worse, is called fear avoidance or fear avoidance behavior, activity avoidance behavior. And these are things that attending providers may be able to do something about to address things with workers earlier on. The other thing, the last question, has to do with low recovery expectations. If the worker early on in their case thinks it's so bad that they may never get better, that's a figure out why question. And all of these last three things are things that the attending provider can do or can start addressing to try and deal with this stuff early on. Okay, so this is a copy of the self-administered version of the functional recovery questionnaire, letting you see how it is. There's a couple versions of this around, and I think you HSCs already have a version that you're using to administer with. And this information is then captured in our occupational health management information system. Okay, so a positive FRQ worker is a work comp heart attack. So about 40% of all the FRQ positive workers are disabled a year after their injury. They're still not back to work if they've answered all three of those first three questions positive. If just two of them are positive, about 11% are disabled a year later. If only one of the questions is positive, less than a couple percent are disabled a year later. So this is the earliest screening tool that anyone's come up with to dial in who may be a high-risk patient, all within about the first month of the injury. Okay, so, and the other thing is even those people who did get back to work, of that 60% that went back to work who were FRQ positive, they had more time loss than other workers. I'd also like to emphasize that this FRQ positive situation is a very rare event in all worker comp claims. It's about twice as much as the number of people who get disabled, obviously, if you just do the basic math. But out of, it looks like our experience is out of 30,000 claims a year seen in eastern Washington. Right now it looks like we're identifying about possibly 200 of them that may be FRQ positive. Okay, so when you have this FRQ positive situation or this work comp heart attack, the business as usual just isn't good enough. So attending providers need to spend more time with these people. They need to address concerns and dial in what's going on with the worker's mind about their work tasks, drill through those extra three questions to see what's going on. And most importantly, they need to do things to empower the patient to work through that. One of the biggest tools we have is incrementally increasing their activity. We'll talk about that a little bit more. But the patients who develop control over how much pain they experience and control over incrementally doing a little bit more and get reassurance about their normal recovery, despite the fact that it may be painful, especially in the beginning, those tools will help those workers recover even if they're in that high-risk category. So one of the key things with the COHE and this whole effort that we're doing is when we identify these workers, we need to try and make sure they don't fall through the cracks. So currently, the COHE best practices that have been associated with reducing disability by about 20% have been the accurate and timely submission of the report of accident, day one employer contact, two-way communication between the employer and the attending provider, with understanding of the worker that return to work is a goal of the care, an activity prescription form which identifies what the worker can do, what the restrictions are, and keeps everybody on the same page, and of course the health services coordination that you guys do to connect the dots and try and get the right resources to bear at the right time. There's another best practice that was out there of looking at impediments to return to work. That one in the research didn't show up as being very powerful in terms of reducing the disability, so that's more work. We're just trying to figure out how that fits in best. But the next steps in these COHE best practices are these FRQs: early identification of who's at high disability risk, and the FRI, or functional recovery interventions, which is early attention to those disability risk factors in those high-risk patients. So right now, the FRQ is being administered based on some information you get in your OMS tracking system. And to every worker who appears to be off work after a couple of weeks, you're contacting them, getting the FRQ administered. And if an FRQ is positive, HSCs are contacting the attending provider to let them know about it. And right now, we're working, this is for the record, this is late 2016. Right now, we're working with volunteer physician advisors and others who have been trained in doing these FRIs and agreed to participate when these situations come up. Eventually, we're hoping, as we work the bugs out, that this can expand COHE-wide. And so right now, you're connecting with these attending providers, letting them know that this is going on. We've met with those attending providers about functional recovery interventions, and they've agreed to do them and agreed to participate with it. Because it's a rare event, they may forget about it or forget what it was or lose their materials. So we're in the development stage of figuring out how to best support attending providers with these people to do the functional recovery interventions, double down on the issues that are positive. So these workers are having a work comp heart attack, and all of us need to do everything we can to make sure they get the extra attention they need. So the interventions for functional recovery are active participation, the worker's own engagement in their own recovery, keeping appointments, doing their prescribed activities and that sort of thing. Going back and discussing normal recovery and the worker's recovery expectations and why they may not have normal recovery expectations. This is all part of the attending provider's task and follow-up visits with these workers, doubling down on work accommodation and job concerns, dialing in whether it's coming from the worker, poor communication, or the employer not having the wherewithal or the resources or the ability to accommodate them, and coming up with plans A, B, C to address that, and you guys already know a lot about that. And if these barriers are identified, working with you guys or the attending provider needs to work with you guys and other department resources to deal with it. The other thing that's really critical is getting the workers involved in incrementally increasing the activity they do. There's an activity diary that's part of the FRI setup, which involves doing regular movement of any kind and incrementally doing a little bit more each day. There's an awful lot of research that shows even this simple kind of activity, incrementally increasing, helps these workers overcome their fear avoidance, their activity avoidance. And if the injury is significant enough that you need physical therapy or chiropractic or something like that, making sure that the providers of those kinds of interventions are focusing on the activity part of it and incrementally increasing activity, achieving functional improvement. If you do refer for PT, or if the attending provider, I should say, refers for PT, you want to assure that that PT is doing active care and is obtaining that functional improvement. And we're recommending that they track the functional progress that the patient is doing. There's all kinds of instruments and surveys and patient-filled out questionnaires that are validated to demonstrate what progress is being made, and there's some tools for the attending providers to do that. So that's a summary of what the functional recovery interventions are. So it's extra attention to patient care, may require more frequent office visits, more time with patient counseling, more attention to physical activity, more oversight for PT referrals, more attention to work issues, more attention to documenting functional improvements and gains that have been made, and better communication with you guys. So these FRIs that we're asking the attending providers to do for the few patients that are at high risk may seem a little redundant with the best practices everyone thinks they're already doing, but somehow the first round didn't didn't work with these patients and they're in this high-risk category, needs to go back and be done again. And of course, the services that the attending providers provide are billable for a variety of different kinds of services. And of course, any time you spend working the claim specifically is billable as part of your work. For example, extra office visits for FRIs can be billed for, claim-specific consultations with a physician advisor. If, for instance, an attending provider doesn't know what to do, but we've got other providers who are kind of superstars and can help out, linking them up to communicate and coach the attending provider through some difficult cases is one of the options. Both of those providers, even if it's done telephonically, can bill and get paid for that service. There's another thing that we're doing, which you're familiar with, which is called the Fri Tracking Sheet, which just identifies the FRI best practices. And it's just a simple checklist type form. It's currently being revised, and you've probably seen it already on your GoCohi website. And in other trainings I've done with you. But we've just updated it so this tracking sheet can now be filled out, and the provider can bill for it each time they do it, up to 3 times per claim. And at this stage, the idea is for the providers to get this form to the HSCs, and the HSCs just enter the few check marks in ohms as they're working that particular claim. All of the information about this is on the Fri Summary Card, which looks like this and is available on the GoCohi website. Summarizes for the attending provider what the FRI best practices are and what billing codes they would use when they engage in this. And there's lots of resources to assist with this project. We have a office poster, a large poster that summarizes this. In addition to the summary card, there's the FRI tracking sheet. You go to HSCs to help out with issues that crop up. There's involvement of Cohi advisors as a resource for consultation and problem solving, and the centralized ohms tracking system with real-time information that's going there. We're also in the process of building the online Fri Toolkit, part of which is already on the functional recovery section of the GoCohi website, and L&I is working to flesh out that and additional materials on a centralized site. The blank forms like the tracking sheet, activity diaries, PT referral forms for active care, the talking points for activity, psychosocial resources, return to work resources are all things that are part of the toolkit. As a fallback, if the attending providers do the functional recovery interventions with their workers in their office for a few weeks and they're still not recovering and the extra support that the APs aren't providing isn't enough, there are fallback positions. The consultation with physician advisors, there's a progressive goal attainment program, which is a structured program up to 10 weeks with people who've been specially trained, working with workers through some of the psychosocial issues like activity avoidance, catastrophic thinking. If a worker is feeling that they've been unjustly put in this situation, that they're a victim, a lot of the workbook in this progressive goal attainment program works through some of these issues with workers. So the toolkit, which is under instruction, includes the blank forms, the additional resources, and some other best practices resources. On this screen, you can see several of the items are in green, and the rest of them are in black. The green ones currently are available on the GoCohi website, and that's the state of things. So any questions or anything that people have, you can reach me. It's robert.moots@lni.wa.gov, and my phone number is there, 360-902-4998, and we can play email and phone tag to your heart's content. So if there's any questions or discussion that anyone has, I think our master technician Brian is going to figure out how we do that, and I think we can unmute and talk about things.
Yeah, so you can either type in a question through the chat feature, or if you send a quick note to me that you'd like to talk, I can unmute you. Okay, so questions?
Good question. I'll kind of go backwards. So how much do the medical providers bill for reimbursement for an FRI tracking sheet? How much is that?
I think they get around $20 or something for each time they do it, and it's a much smaller, it's just one section of the form.
Right.
There's about 6 check boxes. Yes, I did this with the patient, I did this with the patient, I did this with the patient, and I may have made this PT referral on such and such a date. So it's a small amount of information, takes about 15 to 30 seconds to fill out, and they get $20 for it.
Well, that's really for your data capture and things like that, probably. So what do they do with the CPT code? Is it a more, and I don't even know the levels of the office visit. Is it a more, like, can they bill for a higher reimbursement for their office visit then when they're doing all of this?
Okay, good question. So, yeah, a couple of concepts here. So, attending providers routinely use office visit codes called evaluation and management codes for routine office visits. They are billed, and the level of service and the value of the reimbursement that they bill for that is based on one of two things. They can pick one or the other. And one of the things is the clinical complexity of the visit. So if there are a lot of systems they're looking at, there's a lot of work comp issues they're dealing with, there are ways in the CPT book and the L&I medical aid rule and fee schedules to decide what level of service they qualify for. And these are typically, a couple $100 fees for visits. And that's the routine thing most attending providers do. Those same codes can also be billed based on how much time they spend in face-to-face consultation with the patient's family members, an employer or HR rep or something like that. So they have to pick one way or the other on how they're going to document it. Most physicians use clinical complexity, but if you're going to be talking with a patient and taking more time, you just document the start time and the finish time, and then there's the codes are in the levels of service for each of the codes for time-based or complexity-based are all explained in the CPT manual. And so the $20 fee after they've had that visit is just an extra thing on top of that. So they're going to document that stuff in the patient chart. The reason we're doing it this way and getting it into the system is we're going to be able to track whether or not the attending provider paid attention to this or reported that they paid attention to this. And one of the things over time that we're looking for is to find out if doing this extra work and having you guys do this is really making a difference in our system. We think it will be, but we'd like to have a mechanism to be able to try and figure that out. The challenge if we don't have this mechanism is that in order for us to tell, we have to go in and do individual narrative text chart audits, which is very resource intensive. And if docs aren't documenting stuff the right way, we can't necessarily tell what happened or what didn't happen.
Okay.
This is Patty. I have another question. Is there any way if we get a positive on our Q score that HSCs can actually start the script? Where you've got the things for the medical provider, is there any way that we can actually start that conversation about, okay, you should try to increase your activity level, stay within your restrictions, blah, 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 but that we can actually start that conversation. Let's make sure that you get an appointment scheduled. When's your next appointment? If they're in that kind of stage, do they go every week? Are they seen every 2 weeks or whatever? But I think actually the conversation can start right there. Usually I tell them their FRQ score is positive, so I'm going to just follow your medical, watch to see your progress. But I really, there's sometimes when there are patients that I say, okay, just try to walk up your block sit back and stay within your restrictions and just get out and get some fresh air, but I mean, is there something that we could have that would kind of get it going instead of waiting for the next appointment for the medical provider?
Patty, I love the way you're thinking. And one of the things I've got to emphasize is there is a whole lot of work going on, not only in L&I and our effort on these psychosocial issues and patient engagement and patient motivation, but there's stuff going on throughout the healthcare system figuring out how best to do that. There are two other projects that L&I is directly engaged in. One is a best practices resource for all of the psychosocial factors that may crop up, in addition to the handful of them that are identified in FRQ, and that's called Psychosocial Determinants Influencing Recovery, or PDIR. Some of you may have heard about this. We've just released an evidence summary on which tools are best and most effective for doing this. So that's one project that's going on, looking at what are the right things and who are the right people to engage in these activities. The other thing that's going on is something called collaborative care for chronic pain, which is directly in alignment to what you're talking about, and is also kind of where we're thinking. It's part of the Healthy Worker 2020 program that L&I is involved in. There's a component in there. We're working with folks from the UW and the pain clinic up there, where they've implemented for support for primary care that's very similar to what you just described in your question, which is identifying what are the issues, having the brief interventions and conversations with the care team, usually a care coordinator or a care manager, they're called in some of those settings. We have not figured out the best way to do that yet, so I guess what I would underscore for the time being, we really need to get the attending provider engaged with that connection with the patient, and to the extent that you can do encouraging things in your conversations with the patient, I think that's great. And I've actually made a little note on Brian's post-it notepad here to look at exploring what are some of the key talking points and key messages that you can do as HSCs when you're on the phone with these patients. We've actually come up with something like that is currently part of the PDIR best practices resource. And I'm going to go back and take a real close look at that because I think that's a great idea. The thing we have to be careful of, okay, and this is me doing my catastrophic thinking here, is if just a phone advisory happens for a patient and they take the advice and do it inappropriately and make something worse, that's a challenge. We have to figure out how to not allow that sort of thing to happen, or prevent that sort of thing from happening, because it creates a whole bunch of other problems, and I don't think you guys have malpractice insurance and that sort of thing. And so those kinds of bugs we have to work out with it, but you're thinking exactly in line with where we're going.
Okay, we had one other question real quick. The question came from Carrie, can we get a copy of this presentation? Carrie, if I send this to you, can you get it sent to everyone in Cohee community?
Yes, I can.
Okay, then I will get it to you.
Yeah, we can make a PDF of it and get it out to you. And then also this is being recorded and the whole seminar will be accessible here. I don't know quite when, but we'll have it.
Probably by next week.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, Patty, did you have another question, or was someone else?
Yeah, I have one question. So one of the advisors, Cohee advisors, that I had a positive FRQ, and I had sent a notification, and then finally called, and he wasn't doing the FRI or FRQ or FRI, and then I said, have you talked to this patient about increasing the activity level? Oh, that's a really good idea. So I'm thinking, if there's an advisor that's not really doing it, and so that's why I'm thinking, okay, HSCs need a little bit to just start the process with the or get them thinking that way. And then really you got to have the providers that are really going to take this on. Because I feel like if they're not doing it and we feel like we're, that's our job, is to make sure we send it to them. Okay, is it appropriate? Well, we're seeing on our end, yeah, it really is appropriate, and they're not doing it. Well, it feels kind of like the end of the road, except that we just keep, following the claim, making sure the medical's in there, and then we make our last ditch effort to the employer to say, do you have light duty available? Sometimes, they will. They'll finally say, okay. But I feel like it's sometimes the end of the road if the provider's not going to do something.
Yeah, absolutely. And this issue that you're identifying is exactly why we're doing this pilot study, to identify how easy it is to translate the best practices on paper into routine stuff in practice, identify what are the range of issues that we come up with getting attending providers to adopt this, what are the backup and safety nets that we're going to be able to develop with you guys, like many of the suggestions you've identified. So we're in the sausage making stage of it, or if you're a vegetarian, I guess it's a tofurkey assembly stage. But in any event, you're exactly in line with where we need to go with this. The one metaphor I talk about, which is kind of where we got the Cohe model from anyway, was working with attending providers back in after World War II, figuring out how to get providers in practice to start routinely taking blood pressure on patients. So they'd known since the 1920s that there were all kinds of cardiovascular problems associated with taking blood pressure, or with high blood pressure, but nobody ever took blood pressure. They had all the technology to do it, but it wasn't on anyone's radar screen. And it took 30 years of work to get the practice of medicine to routinely change. If you went into a doc in the late 50s or early 60s, your chances of getting your blood pressure taken maybe on an annual physical exam were there, but today you can't even go into the dentist without getting your blood pressure checked. It took a long time to get that best practice for people to do that early screening, that high-risk screening. That's one of the reasons I've chosen the metaphor of a work comp heart attack, because providers kind of get it. If we can keep reinforcing that this is a patient having a work comp heart attack, we need to do this stuff. It isn't just a good idea, oh heck yeah, but we've got to figure out how to change the hearts and minds of everybody in the system. And we do envision a big role for HSCs in this, but we're in the sausage making stage of how we make that happen.
Dr. Moose, this is Patty again. On the activity, is there an activity log that the PGAP people have for the patients each week? And is that one of the same kinds of things that the medical provider has?
Yes. So the PGAP has a thick workbook that has specific exercises, including activity, that they work through for up to 10 weeks. And there's weekly visits. It can be done telephonically. It's better if it's done face-to-face. But the patient will receive this workbook and go through it and be coached through it either in a face-to-face visit or over the phone. And it's actually pretty simple for an attending provider to walk through an activity diary. And the trick is to negotiate with the patient what they think they can do. So most of the time people say, oh, I can't do a thing. And so the trick for the physician is to ask, okay, so what is it that you need to do that your injury is stopping you from doing? And then negotiating with the patient, okay, you can't lift up your kid's 45 pounds. Well, can you lift a gallon of milk out of the refrigerator? Okay, are you able to do that? So how about, can you tomorrow try and lift the gallon out of the milk 3 times in a row? Do you think you can do that? Okay, so do it 3 times in a row tomorrow, and then the day after tomorrow, do you think you can do that 4 or 5 times in a row? Maybe 4 times? Can you try and do that? Let's see how it goes and take it out one more time for a week. The idea is to empower the patient to incrementally increase what they do and focus their mind on doing that activity. So that's what the activity, incrementally increasing activity and activity diary do. And if we find someone who's starting to show signs of activity avoidance because they think they're going to hurt themselves, this is a standard tool that physicians should be using with patients to do this. And it's been validated. It's been tested that it's pretty effective for a lot of patients with musculoskeletal injuries. A lot of docs don't know about it, and that's part of our challenge with getting this information in front of docs. We've got the toolkit, we've got the posters, we've got the summary cards, we've got the little scripts. We're doing the academic detailing and visiting with the docs who are volunteering. We'll go back and get more information from them as we do this to see what worked, what didn't work. Your issue of identifying even one of our bright physician advisors who's enlightened, who didn't think of doing it, underscores the importance of repetitive messaging with providers. If even the good ones forget to do it, we've got to figure out what's the best way to keep this in front of people. And again, it's really tough because this is a rare event. Your high volume docs may get 6 or 8 of these patients a year is all. Out of their hundreds of patients they're seeing in a year, it's just a small number that are like this. So figuring out the ways to keep that in front of them, as well as building infrastructure for fail-safe with support people like HSCs. That's exactly where we're going with it.
Okay, I get why the activity coaching and all that needs to be done by someone who has liability insurance. So I get that, where they know, if something is working or not, and to back off or get that, do more. So I'm thinking that the active physical therapist, like that, maybe they can have the activity log and things like that. So they're working, more with that, because they're going to see them 2 or 3 times a week, and I wonder how many physical therapists might know that kind of thing.
Yes, and if you, well, I don't want to say this in front of Ben, but yeah, that's the kind of thinking we like. Part of Healthy Worker 2020, one of the components of that effort is going back and looking at what we've got to do to develop best practices and the right kinds of incentives for physical medicine, for PT care, OT care, chiropractic care, that sort of thing. So this is very definitely on the radar screen. Right now, there are some administrative issues that we're grappling with. PTs are not part of the provider network. And so we're in the process of identifying ways to work with PTs to adopt the best practices. About a third of them out there, based on our initial screenings and data analysis, are doing the right stuff early on and documenting doing the right stuff. So there's a lot of room for improvement with working with PTs. One of the things we talked about early on when we first were doing the FRQ project with you guys, when we first met with the physician advisors, there was a lot of discussion on how do we work with PTs, how do we get PTs up to speed on this stuff. And we've got to build the infrastructure to make that happen. Right now, we don't even have the infrastructure in place for the role of attending providers in doing it. So it's on the radar screen, it's a bigger project, and I think probably we're going to find case-by-case situations where there's already some PTs that are engaged in this sort of stuff. You guys know Christopher Goodwin and the group he works with. Their PTs are doing this kind of stuff all the time. I happen to know that in Spokane. I don't know what's going on with some of the other PT groups over there.
But one of the other things is, I see coming from medical providers' offices are the referral note to a physical therapist that says at your discretion. So they're not even, unless the HSC is getting back to them and saying, okay, this FRQ score is positive, and they're not a participating provider. They don't even know what the FRI is or FRQ.
Yeah. So Patty,
I would get them to change their referral to the physical therapist, get active physical therapy. And another thing I just wanted to bring up is I have chiropractors who say, yeah, I don't want to go straight into physical therapy because they're having so much pain right now. I don't want them to have additional pain from the physical therapy. they don't make the referral to physical therapy right away and all that kind of stuff. So there are a lot of chiropractors who need some help in kind of distinguishing. So, I mean, I think the communication comes from the HSC, but we can't really tell them what to do. They're the medical provider. So we've got some challenges here.
You're absolutely right. We have some challenges. One of the things, let me just call your attention to, on the Go Kohi website, I believe you have the, let me go back up here. You have, if you're on your screen there, you can see there's a PTOT active care referral form. So that's one of the pieces in the FRI toolkit. And when I do the academic detailing with the providers, we point that out and go over it. And that's very detailed in the script. When you're using PT with these high-risk patients, you've got to document that functional improvement and move forward with it. And relative to working with the different groups, we've got lots of activities going generally with different provider groups, including the chiropractors. They're the ones that are, the Chiropractic Advisory Committee has been putting together all of the evidence-based best practices resources, and we have the same problems with those guys that we have with anyone else. Overall, when we look at the population data of L&I, the strongest predictor of someone not being disabled a year after their injury above everything else in our system is chiropractor as first physician. And so the DCs are more routinely built into doing the incrementally increasing activity and the recovery expectations and that sort of stuff. So they're a little bit less of a problem, on the whole for this kind of stuff. But there are situations where some of them aren't following through. And I just want to, we've been talking a lot with Patty. Are there any other HSCs that also have some questions that we need to get at? Oh, Ben is speaking.
Yeah, I was asking about the PTOT referral form.
Yes.
And wondering, is that something that we should be having? We should have the attending provider. We should be encouraging them to use that in their PT referrals.
Yeah, I think that would be great. And the active PT referral form was developed when we originally were working on FRQ. This was developed by the PTs that are supporting the Valley Medical Group. What the information and the things they thought would be the most useful. And I don't have it in front of me. There's two versions of the active PT referral form. There's one that's a general one for the department that doesn't have this information, but there's an FRQ, FRI specific one that on the back of the form details what's going on in the FRQ, FRI pilot. And I think this is a good idea to talk about what are the most important tools that would be helpful for all of you guys in getting this stuff done. So we may, if we need to, print up stacks of those and get them out to you to hand out on your annual visits to the docs, or mail them to the ones who are agreeing to participate in the FRI thing. We'll be thinking about this. And I know Pete has been doing a lot of work with this, and so we meet with Pete and Ben regularly. Is it about monthly or so? Yeah. To look at what's going on, what the issues and good ideas are coming up with. So we have a mechanism as we're trying to build this and improve this. Let Ben or Pete know what's going on. I think we've been trying to get Carrie to participate in those sometimes too.
Yes.
And so yeah, we want to come up with all these great ideas and figure out how we get that in a way that makes sense and works.
Are there other questions that others would like to ask?
Carrie's speaking, and I can't hear her.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yeah.
I have a question about the FRA tracking data entry. When are we anticipating going live with that for the HSCs?
Good question. It's imminent. Do you have any information on it, Brian?
Carrie, so part of it is that they're still finalizing the mechanisms with the HPPM and the billing team so that it can work. But as you and I discussed, I told them, even when you're ready to do that, don't flip it on until we've had an opportunity to do some initial preparation and training on what the new FRI form looks like and what the billing looks like. So once they say they're ready, then we'll arrange a time for you and I and whoever else you'd like to do it via telephone, webinar, conference kind of thing. And then from there, then you can go out to all of the HSCs and show them what the new form looks like.
Yeah, so the form has been developed and the programming has happened in OHMS for it, and we're working out the payment issues and dialing in how it's going to be finalized. So,
did that answer your question, Carrie?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions before we prepare to conclude? Okay. Well, just as a reminder, our objective will be to take this program, this webinar that Bob has shared with us. We will record it, and then we will have it prepared hopefully by no later than next week, and then we'll make it available to anyone who wasn't able to join us today, and that you will also be able to share with medical providers who would like to listen in and get a little bit more information on this. Okay, and I won't wait until then. I'll send today, Carrie, I'll send you the copy of the PowerPoint that Bob presented, and you can share the PowerPoint with everyone.
Thank you, Brian.
Okay. All right.
okay, and I will also get to work. I really like the idea of HSC talking points and key messages. I'll get to work on that, and we'll get that out to you. That won't be today, but we'll get it out within the next few weeks.
Okay.
All right, thank you, everybody.
Yeah, appreciate everyone's time.